If you're interested in what I look like in real life and want to learn more about me, then follow my Instagram page at Joe the Insomniac. A little bit of background about myself. I worked my entire adult life in the Pacific Northwest woods. Over 15 years in total, with about 7 years of that being for the Park Service at Olympic National Park. Many experiences over the years could warrant the title of creepy, but this one in particular always stuck with me. While working for the Park Service, one of my jobs was that of a restoration carpenter. We would travel to old backcountry historical cabins, emergency shelters, homesteads and chalets, tasked with repairing, restoring, and the maintenance of old historical estates. This was a wonderful yet demanding job. I'd spend 8 days at a time living off the beaten path, usually deep in the woods in the backcountry. Sometimes we'd be flown in supplies. Sometimes we'd use llamas or mules to pack our gear on, all the while sleeping in thinly walled single tents, cooking over a fire or a whisper-light stove, using the same tools and techniques the original homesteaders had at their disposal in the late 1800s to construct and survive off this unforgiving environment. One late fall, I was assigned to work near Lake Ozatep at an old homestead off the trail, near the constructed boardwalk. For those unfamiliar with the area, Lake Ozatep is 8 miles long and 3 miles wide. It's a large, natural lake in Washington. Lake Ozatep has a long and rich history of Native American culture. The Mucka Tribal Center in Nipe houses discoveries found in the area dating back 2,000 years, along with a local village that was well preserved from over 300 years ago by a mudslide that left most of the artifacts intact. The Ozatep Loop Trail, which the homestead was directly adjacent to, is approximately 9 miles through and through. The man-made boardwalk takes you under giant cedar groves, meanders through huge patches of chest-high sala before delivering you to Alzheimer's Parade, about 2.5 miles from the trailhead. Now, this is a giant soggy meadow, which once farmed 2 Swedish immigrants. They constructed a small cabin and some outbuildings on the 150-acre bog, with cattle, sheep, vegetables, and garden stuff. Now, they held out here for over 50 years. Over time, the forest, as it always does, decides to take back its own. The now deceased, long abandoned farm was hardly recognizable. Our job was to beat back the encroaching forest, put new windows in the main cabin, pipe in a new stove, and apply fresh paint and fix up proportions of the semi-dilated barn. The ultimate goal being to allow guided tours to take place sometime in the future. For about 3 weeks, we stayed at the Ozatep bunkhouse while working at this place. This was good duty for us. We weren't sleeping under the rain. The beds were warm. Our hike was short and the train not so difficult. We had a TV. The bunkhouse was located near the highway and the ranger station. We would have to hike the 5-mile loop every day, bringing us boards, tools, paint, and everything else we needed. These were full 10-hour plus days, These would usually start at 7 in the morning, beginning us to the bunkhouse, finishing at around 5. At one point during the fall, there were 4 of us walking and working towards this project. By the time of the event, there was only 2 of us remaining. Most of the hard work was already done. We needed to hike a few last boards into the prairie to complete a proportion of the woodshed before we called the job done. I volunteered to pack the mule for the day, my only job being to carry as many boards as I could muster in each trip to the prairie before returning to the ranger station for the next load. It was late in the season for hikers at this point. The weather had turned and we'd be lucky to see 2 or 3 people a day doing the loop. Around the 4th and 5th trip, I was pretty tired. It's late in the evening now, around 4, and my co-worker called it a day. I thought I could get one more trip in before it got too dark. My rationale being, the more trips I did today, the less it is tomorrow, and we passed on the trail. I told him my intentions and continued on. I discovered the last of the boards of the day. Took a look around the prairie as the sun started to tuck behind the trees, and started my hour hike back to the station. The lighting on the boardwalk was quite low at this point. The cedars are blocking most of the ambient light left by the setting sun and making visibility quite diminished. I'm not a nervous hiker and felt spook easily, having solo hiked for weeks on end in the backcountry I've seen. Lots of cougars, being confronted by Klondike bears in Alaska. Even ran into a few demented hillbillies over the years, but as I left the prairie, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Goosebumps erupt from my forearms. An uneasy feeling swept over me. Suddenly I wanted to walk faster, jog then sprint. I didn't though. I convinced myself that I'd been reading too many fantasy novels and that there's nothing to be scared of. I walk another 5 minutes or so before I start hearing something faint, sounding like music. It's impossible, I tell myself. I'm the only one out here, still at least 2 miles from civilization. And that civilization in reality being likely the only other soul out here. My co-workers, sure enough, however. I heard music, more specifically a piano. It started out so faint that I had to stop moving to actually try and hear it. The steps on the wooden boardwalk began too loud. Every time I paused, I heard it unmistakably, it getting louder. I stood there, now fully hidden behind the horizon. I'm now in total silence other than the piano. I became aware that there were no longer the noises of life, i.e. no birds or insects, no wind, no rustling of leaves or underbush. Absolutely nothing other than the piano, as if everything was being weighed down by a fog of emptiness of sorts. I've encountered this dead time before in the woods. Certain places have it, but this is different somehow, unique to this place and this moment in time. I tried to focus on the keys, but I couldn't recognize the composition. Unsurprisingly, as I mostly listened to Metallica and Korn at the time, it was playing with a purpose. It was controlled, in tune and thoughtful. It was a song, and somehow I felt that it was meant for just me at this moment. I started walking again. Almost on cue, the music once again gets louder. As my pace increases, so does the tempo of the keys, still in tune, never floundering. It reaches the perfect moment, almost in sync with my heartbeat, but then as quickly as it came, the piano stopped, whooshed away in a fraction of a moment. It didn't trail off, it didn't fade into extinction, it was just gone. Suddenly, everything that was absent was swept away as if by a gust of wind. The stillness was gone, the gloom and stagnation and weight of everything was lifted. My next step on the boardwalk was once again in reality. The evening was just as absent of light as it was before. Somehow, once again, life is interjected back into the forest and everything's as normal. I didn't hear the piano that night again, nor sense it. I told my co-worker every detail when I reached the bunkhouse. He showed no signs of disbelief. We didn't talk about it again until years later, when something similar happened to another Park Service station employee. When I told my grandfather about what happened, as he's a retired park ranger who had worked nearby at Mora, the next station over, without hesitation he said, "Did you hear bagpipes along with it? Or just a piano?" It seems, as I've learned and experienced since then, there's a lot more to this place, a lot more to the Olympics in general than anyone really knows or is willing to admit. I work for a well-known university as a field biologist and have recently been contracted out of the National Forest Service. My first assignment has been in the Potomac district in the Monongahela National Forest. Basically, I receive GPS coordinates and I either drive or hike to the designated spot and then do whatever they want me to do. This could be setting up trail cameras and/or counters, monitoring equipment, trail surveys, and the like, and then recording the data 24 hours after placement. No big deal. I thought it was odd that specifically I was requested to place cameras only 3 feet off the ground, and some of the infrared cameras in trees at specific heights. Some of these locations are on designated trails, but others are off the trail in places that humans would never go. Sometimes there isn't a hotel or lodging close enough. Now these are remote mountains in WV, and the Forest Service has outfitted me in some pretty dank camping gear on the occasions I might have to camp. I'm an experienced hiker and camper, and have spent many nights alone out in the field due to my career choice. I am a woman, about 5'6" and 130 pounds, but not really afraid of anything. Again, the Forest Service has outfitted me well, and I wear an emergency beacon that will send every law enforcer officer in the area my location in no time. So I've been assigned to this district for a few months and have really enjoyed my work. VW is a very remote and unspoiled area. I get to see things most people wouldn't, and I've had so many positive and spiritual moments up there. Up until a few nights ago, I was working up near Spruce Knob, which is the highest point in VW, and a complex system of trails, wilderness areas, camping, etc. It has been snowing and howling winds and ice storms. I was camping up there to complete my work while the conditions were rough. I was almost enjoying it. My first night in the woods was very peaceful. I made dinner, set up camp, and drank some whiskey and smoked some really good bud. I snuggled down in my sleeping bag and slept like a rock. It was very cold, but I wear this turtle fur face mask thing and didn't feel the cold too much. I woke up at dawn and went about building my fire back up and started making some more coffee, when I noticed all this churned up snow around my campsite. Not tracks though, just turned up snow, like someone or something had kicked all around. Weird, I think, but whatever. I had a 15-mile hike to set some cameras and didn't have time to really wonder about it. I set off on my hike, did what I do, and started back to camp. I'm never able to wear earbuds or anything, so I have a good sense of my surrounding. Now it's already past dark when I made it back to camp, and I was too tired to do anything except lay and just try and pass out. But around 2 AM, I woke up because I can hear talking. It's people. I was about 30 miles up on a gravel road that was locked with Forest Service gates, about 10 miles from where my truck was parked, and I can hear voices. I completely lose it. I have a firearm and I quietly retrieve it from my backpack, getting in my sleeping bag, cocking it and waiting. I'm on high alert. All my senses are going wild. Eventually the voices faded and I can't hear them anymore, but I never went back to sleep. At daylight, I emerged from my tent to more churned up snow, and my 2 trail cameras hanging from a tree about 5 feet from my tent. Cams I placed 15 miles out from my site. I pack up all my stuff and haul out of there as quick as humanly possible. I'm terrified. What the hell has done this? Along the way, I saw lots of human boot tracks of different shoe sizes around my site. I discovered I've been broken into and my computer has also been stolen. I'm currently in a luxury log cabin at some resort, too scared to even retrieve my other equipment and too embarrassed to tell my supervisors just how afraid I am. The Forest Service brought me a new truck while my other one's getting the window replaced, and I did make a report about the theft, but there's no way in hell I'm going back to that site. Who knows how many people are out there and what they wanted from me. I consider this a lucky escape. I don't know if this means I'll be fired or sent to work at a desk, but in all my years of working and doing this in national forests around the country, I've never been more terrified. I'm not scared of the animals, but it's the people that are truly scary out there. I am scared of the people. This story takes place in August of 2013 in the mountains of southern Oregon. I'm a USAF security force airman. My girlfriend was at work, and as the swelteringly hot day began to turn to thunderstorms, my buddy Nick, another MP, and I decided to go exploring the back roads and get out of the heat of the town. Southern Oregon is crisscrossed with logging roads, some actively used, many totally forgotten and overgrown. Nick and I spent many of our days starting on roads that we knew, finding roads we didn't know, driving for hours into the mountains, eventually navigating back to paved roads. On this particular day, with the storm clouds brewing overhead, we set off on a road we'd never been on and drive into the mountains. After driving for an hour, we didn't see nor hear any signs of other people in the woods. We round a bend in the thick fir woods and emerged in a meadow that's totally surrounded by thick aspen. The meadow was perfectly flat, yet eerily still. We both noticed a strange stillness almost immediately. There's no birds, hardly any insect noise, and no squirrels. Certainly no people. On the far side of the meadow, right at the edge of the tree line, is a picnic table. That's odd. It's painted bright orange, and was much larger than a normal one. Remarking on this, Nick drove through to get a closer look. I remembered being apprehensive as we approached. The whole scenario was exceptionally strange. The overall silence of the aspen grove is unsettling. Also, it was nearly impossible to see far into the aspens because they grow close together. We park by the table. I hop out the passenger seat and try and check it out. I'm not very tall though, about 5'5". The table is ridiculously oversized and practically unstable. The seats were nearly at chest height. I would have to climb on to sit in one. As I'm looking at the table, Nick called me over to the truck, and we noticed, looking back into the aspens, that there's no one else here, but it's too quiet. Now at first I don't know what Nick's looking at, but then I notice a splash of colour, completely out of place in the thick trees. I see a small one-man tent that was set back in the trees, about 50 yards from the strange table. Now I have an initial sense of dread, and certainly felt that there's someone in there, and if we could see the tent, they can see us. There were no campgrounds in the area, no people, no main roads for miles. Surely someone camping so remotely would be, at the very least, a strange person. However, as we observe the tent, we don't see any movement or hear any sounds coming from it. Nick suggested I call out. I didn't wanna, but I did. Hey, anyone in there? No reply. Finally, completely on edge, Nick and I thought about driving away and leaving this strange area, but we began to fear the worst. What if there's a body in the tent? What if someone's got kidnapped? Foolish, I know, but we thought it at the same time. After some debate, we decided to have Nick turn the truck around to drive away from the camps, should we need to leave in a hurry. He would be waiting behind the wheel. With my heart pounding, I start walking through the trees towards the tent. I was totally keyed up with my senses high. When I reach the campsite, there's several things that strike out as odd. Backpacks scattered all over. No fire is being built, no wood collected, and the tent is literally packed full of women's clothes. Full of dread, I turn to leave and tell Nick what I've seen. As I turn left, I heard Nick yelling, "Let's go, get out of here, now." Not knowing why he's yelling, I ran back to the truck. When I broke out of the trees, I see an old beat-up Ford on the road blocking us from leaving the meadow. I immediately leaped to the passenger seat and Nick floored the gas pedal. The car was occupied by two men. A third person is lying against the window in the back. As we drove across the meadow, the driver attempts to block us on the road, but Nick drove around them and accelerates the way we've come from. I looked back and saw the car attempting to turn around on the narrow road. Nick drove like a madman, and I was so terrified they'd catch up with us. We hit the highway and got the hell out of there. I called the state police, and they promised to send a trooper out to check the scene. However, I received a call the next day from a trooper stating that the campsite, the packs, and all the women's clothes were gone. Though they could tell someone's been in the area, they couldn't tell where they'd left to. Again, here's one of the stories from when I lived off the grid in the forest of West North Carolina. Some of my friends and I lived in these small shacks, essentially a shed with a loft, that were very close together. Living in such primal and close conditions breeds a kind of deep, trusting friendship you can't get from anywhere else. So naturally, we did almost everything together by a little semicircle of houses. There was a railroad track that, if you followed it south, would lead to a waterfall. This waterfall in particular is where everybody would go to do drugs. It was a normal night, humid, sometime in early July. A group of about 6 friends and I decided to walk out there at night. I was the only sober one in the group, so I felt a higher sense of responsibility for everyone, and therefore was on edge and hyper aware of my surroundings. Others walked slower and faster, or stopped altogether in the group, so it was natural and expected that we wouldn't be able to see everyone at the same time. John was in a rare form though. When someone had to stop to pee, he come out of the bushes and scared her, and then ran off behind the rest of the group. This annoyed me and another person since it was a clear invasion of privacy and unnecessary. We eventually got to where we could see him again, but he's walking by himself, then slipped back into the bushes without even looking at us. Dismissing it as him being off his head, we kept moving forwards. Still, not back with the whole group yet, we realised that he's following behind us, just far enough that we can see his silhouette. Finally, we catch up with the rest of the group and see that they're accounted for. Even John, we asked him how he got ahead of us and beat the group up ahead, and had been at least 50 yards behind us just a minute ago. But he says he was here the whole time. Literally everyone in the group goes dead silent. That wasn't him that scared the girl when she peed. It wasn't him that followed us. It was someone else entirely. We never made it to that waterfall that night. When I was working as a backpacking guide in Western NC, my schedule dictated a full 8-day shift with 6 days off. During those 6 days, myself and other co-workers would play in the woods. In the summer, you can't beat a mountain swimming hole. One of our favourites was called Paradise Falls, alternatively called Wolf Creek Falls. This is a cliff jumping spot with a huge swimming area, a tiny slot canyon, and an inner pool. Most will venture to do the small jump in the inner pool, even though it's the smallest jump. It's arguably the less accessible. Even though the jump is 9 foot at most, you must work through a 10-minute rock scramble to get to the top. We were all venturing in, and from inside of this tiny canyon, you can't see the main pool. Well, we got to the jump and coaxed the first person off, a fellow guide who had never been to the spot before. She successfully jumped and swam off into the main pool and beach area, and then she screams, because she was now out of sight. Myself and another guy jumped in and swam the short distance to her with the others in tow. Of course, we figured she is injured somehow. She was treading water though, and just staring wide-eyed at the riverbank. When I looked at the shore, there stood a man. Massive, I mean easily 6'7", and a little change. He wore beat-up overalls but no shirt. Perhaps the most disturbing is that he had folds of skin all over his body. Imagine the Michelin Man but made of flesh. His face, his arms, his chest. Everything had a uniform layer of shielding fat rolls. and he was holding a shotgun. The area around Wolf Creek is just holler after holler, but there's a few residents, and those few have been there for generations, propagated by the same families. They do not like outsiders and keep relations within the family. I could only summarize that this individual is a product of inbreeding over decades. Now he just watches as we scramble to grab anything important, stuffing it in the bag. He just stood there and watched as we hightailed it out of there towards the parking area, and he never says a word. He watches us until we're entirely out of sight. His eyes are piercing me the whole time. So I'm 16 and don't have my license yet. My friend is also 16. As my mum was driving us to his house to drop him off, we're on a really long road for about 20 minutes that was basically completely straight. Wood on both sides, and no side roads that were dead ends. A truck was behind us, which is annoying at first, but eventually got a bit concerning that their brights were on, and they kept getting closer and closer. Soon my mum's doing 70 on a wooded road in Wisconsin with deer just to avoid this guy. He just kept on getting closer. Eventually my mum tried to do a fox turn into a driveway so he would pass us. He slowed down, and as my mum did a 35-degree turn, he stopped directly in front of the driveway to attempt to block us from the road. My mum floored it, and the guy stopped at the next driveway and literally did the same thing. But we later realised he's following us again. This went on for a good half hour before we ever lost him. Now for context, I'm a 31-year-old female. I frequently visit the nearby parks that are generally well used. It's rare I end up on a hike not seeing at least one or two people. I grew up on camping and hiking trips and feel very comfortable out in nature. I always inform people where I'm going and when I'll be back. I have to do safety first, right? One day last year, I was going stir crazy, so I took myself out on a popular nature educational centre. There's a bunch of trails that stem from one spot. They're not long trails, but all interconnected, so it's easy to create your own distance. It's midweek, so I'm not expecting to encounter many people. Maybe a school group at most. I grab my backpack, lock the car and head out. It's a beautiful sunny day. Mid-autumn, so a bit chilly out. I was listening to the sounds of nature around me, some squirrels, birds, even a deer crossed my trail at one point. I was sticking with the main trail, which had educational signs identifying different types of plants as you went along. I made my way up the first little hill and made my way down the path where it makes a sharp turn. Up ahead, I caught sight of a man wearing a dark blue jacket. Strange. I haven't seen any signs of a person or heard anyone whatsoever. Normally I'm confronted seeing someone else, but this time my gut instinct is not happy. I take note of the way the person went and continue along. Blue Jacket had taken the path. I wanted to create a longer hike. It would have been a lot more secluded and less travelled, so for once I tried to be smart. I listened to my gut and just followed the main route back to my car, keeping it short and safe. I still had about 2 kilometers to get back to the parking lot. The clouds decide they want to make a skirt across the sky, making the woods dull and ominous. I keep looking over my shoulder, feeling very unsettled. The trees cast finger-like shadows that do not help calm my imagination whatsoever. One of my favourite spots on the trail had a few huge boulders and rock formations right in the middle that you had to go around. I really dreaded going through them in this kind of weather. Now I can't pinpoint at first until I notice some scuffs around the base of the rocks going the other way round that something's wrong here. The trail is very obvious, which is you should go to the left, but these marks are going the wrong way. It looked like someone walked around the rocks dragging their feet behind them. An animal? Maybe. I can't figure it out. I wanted to turn around and go back the way I came, but this would have added an easy 4 kilometers back to the car. I stuck close to the far side of the real path, keeping a close eye on the rock formation. As I made it to the other side of the rocks, I caught sight of some fabric. The same blue fabric I saw earlier. The person moved as though ducking between some rocks to avoid me. For Blue Jacket Man to reach the rocks before me, he had to cut through the woods or have sprinted a good 5 kilometers of trail. I didn't like either option, as I don't know this person and don't want to know them. Maybe he's taking a leak. Yeah, I'll go for that. I pick up my pace and dug out my phone. I texted my usual hiking friend telling them the details in case I suddenly go missing. I glance behind me again, and he's standing there now staring at me. I pick up the pace and sprint the way back to my car, hopping in, immediately locking the doors. Now more weirdly, there's no other cars in the area, and there's no nearby towns, so I have no clue how he got here. I took a couple of minutes to sort myself out, to calm down, to speed out of there. And as I'm doing so, there's that damn blue jacket on the signpost that I've just passed to get in my car with no one nearby. How the hell could he have got there that quick? It doesn't make sense. I've been so spooked by the encounter that I refuse to ever hike again on my own. I still have no explanation to what that guy wanted, or how he moved so quick to this day. When I was a junior in college, I went camping with 4 friends in Bald Eagle State Park in PA. We had reserved a campsite that is pretty remote, pretty deep in the park, way up on one of the mountains, not near by any other campsite. It was located at the end of a narrow dirt road, maybe about 75 feet long, which itself broke off from the main road, which I think was also dirt. There was nothing at the end of the little road but our campsite. We parked at the entrance to the park, spent all day hiking up to the site, setting up camp and then hiking around. We made a fire, made dinner and turned in. Not long afterwards, we discovered that one of the guys with us snored loudly, like shake the walls of the tent loud. Truly deafening stuff. After probably half an hour or so, the rest of us gave up on trying to sleep, climbed into our tents, leaving our loud friend snoring away. My friend at the time was a DJ for our school's radio station. She had a late night show. I think she was on between midnight and 2 AM. Since we couldn't sleep, we trekked up to the main road where the reception's better, where we would actually be able to hear the radio over the snores. When we got back to the road, we stood in a loose circle around the entrance at our site. As we stood up there, a black pickup with its lights off appeared out of the woods and passed us very slowly. It was unmarked, so not a ranger. We listened to the radio for maybe half an hour or 45 minutes after that, and even briefly called in to say hi. Finally though, we decided to go back to bed. One of the girls went off into the woods to take care of some things while I climbed back into the tent. I shared with her and got into my bag. After a couple of minutes, I heard her moving through the leaves towards the tent, coming from my right. At the same time, I also heard the unmistakable rumble of tires on the ground. I stood up and looked out of the little screen window of the tent. We hadn't bothered to put up the rain fly, as it's a perfectly clear night with a very bright moon, so I can see everything. I saw my friend come sprinting back to the tent and duck behind it, just as a black truck pulls into our campsite, still with its headlights off, and then shuts off its engine and sits there. Our friend is still snoring. I have a little knife in my tent, and I know my other two friends have at least one in theirs, but we have no other weapons, no guns or bear spray, so I just watch. As I said, it's a clear night. I can see the truck just fine. It's maybe 20 feet from my tent. But I can't see who's in the truck or how many people are in there. Nothing seems to be moving inside the truck. I still remember the metallic clunk as the engine turned off. I honestly have no idea for how long I watched it. My friend had ducked down behind our tent, and I could hear by her breathing that she's terrified. Neither of us said a word. It feels like a really long time went by. It had to have been at least 10 minutes, but it could have been half an hour or more. We just kept waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. Eventually the truck started up again, and then backed up down the long narrow dirt road. I never saw it turn its headlights on. I heard it drive back in the direction it originally come from, and that was it. My friend burst into the tent a second later. Now we're all talking. Did you see that? What the hell? But our friend is still asleep. Eventually we went back to bed. We packed up and headed out in the morning as planned. And yes, we checked with the park, and they do not own any black unmarked SUVs, nor did any ranger come to check on our campsite at night. My fiance and I were camping, as we've done many times at a particular state park that we enjoy going. Everything was normal. We made some dinner on the fire, stayed up for a bit and let the fire die, and went to go into the tent. Despite reading so many stories, the woods never scared me. This night my brain decided that a reoccurring nightmare about someone walking through our tent at night would be a good idea. So I'm going through these cycles of dreaming that I've woken up to footsteps around my tent, trying to wake up my fiance, Fallon, then going to sleep again, and eventually waking up realizing nothing's here. Though this time, I realize I'm not dreaming. There's definitely footsteps. Then I hear a deep, low, throaty growl, and I'm petrified. I manage to reach over to wake up my fiance, whispering there's someone outside. He wakes up, and we continue to hear something walking around the tent, growling and snarling. We're terrified now. I've never heard anything like it. From the sounds of it, this thing is very big or an insane person, we can't tell. We're trying to peek out but can't see anything. The noises move over to the edge of the site and there's a lot of growling, then screaming, then silence. Then it's on the other side of the tent. This is making it really hard to decide what to do. We're trying to be silent while gathering what little feeble weapons we have. Me with my canister of pepper spray. My husband has a knife. Now, we don't even have a hatchet on us because I left it at home. Basically, if we're attacked, we're screwed. Now, there's some screaming going on along the edge of the site now. It sounds like every small animal in northeastern United States is being skinned alive around us. I'm shaking. I had to stand because the adrenaline pumping felt like I was about to pass out. We still can't pinpoint where this thing is or catch any glimpses of it. We're definitely gonna die now. It's late in the season, there's maybe one other occupied site, and we showed up late. We're about to be eaten or mauled. I'm losing it. Finally, in a couple of minutes of silence, we realise that there's a sound of something going away. We decide to quickly grab our wallets, not even our supplies. I wouldn't have even cared how many paychecks worth of gear we had there. We were going to hit the car panic button and run for it while presumably this beast is not long gone from us, hoping that it will eventually return to our camp again. So we rush out and try and use the car to make as much sound as possible. We then hit a convenience store to go home for the night, then gear up in the morning with some high-powered CO2 weapons and everything. But we go back and didn't find anything. We literally don't see any sign of any of our stuff. It's all been taken. Whatever that was out there still remains unknown to us. Now, I work at a nursing home. Now, it's pretty creepy being there in the daytime, but the night, man, there's something else about it. Almost like an electricity in the atmosphere that you could cut with a knife. Now, I work security there, so I often don't have much trouble in terms of break-ins and stuff. Most of the internal stuff is dealt by the nurses. Now, I often find most of my time spent on Facebook or other things on the internet. There's not really much to do, to be honest. You can check the cameras periodically, and I do so every 5 minutes. We have 16 in total to check. Now, I'm the only one who works there. That's the only thing that puts me on edge. I always wished I at least had someone else to talk to, or to have some kind of backup outside of the cops if I really got in trouble, but hey, it is what it is. One thing that always struck out to me as odd is one particular night on a summer's day. We kept on getting reports off of the residents of a strange sound coming from different rooms at night, but no one could report exactly where the sound was coming from. It almost sounded as though there's a tapping sound directly above an empty room, but when I went to investigate, there was nothing there. It was, however, as I was coming back, that something really weird happened. Almost as if to mock me, I heard the same mocking sound after saying to myself, I knew it was nothing. And then there's a sudden drop in the temperature that I just can't describe. It was like somebody dropped me in ice cold water. And it wasn't just my mind. My whole body got covered in goosebumps, and the thermometer on my phone was telling me that the temperature had also dropped. It's really odd, but things got slightly more weird. Unfortunately, a patient had passed away in one of the rooms. I wasn't aware of this at the time though. I only found out a week later, and I was on a shift a few days after it happened. I was there checking out the cameras when I noticed that the screen seemed to be glitching slightly. There seemed to be some kind of flashing light coming from the room. Not like a light switch light, but almost a bluish glowing orb thing. I turned the screen on and off a couple of times and it went away. but I heard that damn knocking again. I then got up to investigate it, and as I did, I saw the lights flickering in that room that the patient had died in. Now I didn't know it at the time, so I went to investigate. I call out for anyone and get no reply. I have a horrible feeling of dread and I've never felt it since. I go and flick the light, but nothing happens. It won't turn on or off, it's just stuck off. I then could have swore that I felt someone's breath down my neck. Blaming it on myself for being paranoid, I quickly turn to get out of there, and as I do, the light switch comes on again and I hear it flick. Now I quickly go back to the desk and hide behind the cameras, assuring myself that I'll be safe here and I can watch if anything else happens. Luckily for me, nothing else happened that night, and I only found out later that the patient had died in there. But I can tell you, it damn made me resign when I realised what had happened. When I was in Afghanistan, we're in the mountains right on the Pakistan border. The first few months of the deployment were pretty hairy, but as soon as winter rolled around, the fighting season dried up. Things get real quiet. Night shifts went from, where are we gonna get hit, to what kind of weird stuff am I gonna witness now? I think it's February or so, and I was on guard in the north-facing machine gun shack. We all had night vision devices, though it's pitch black. We were always wearing them. Well, I was looking out into the mountains when I see what appears to be a dude crawling out from behind a boulder up the hill about 100 meters away. Being February, we haven't got a hit in almost a month because of 2 feet of snow on the ground and the temps are hovering right around 0. So the Taliban chucked deuces back to Pakistan and left us alone for a few months. Now, this dude is on all fours, like an animal, just sitting there, behind a boulder, staring seemingly in my soul. I don't know how he can possibly see. I point the machine gun at him, and then turn on the visible laser, putting the laser right on his nose, and I don't get a reaction. The dude just stares at me, so now I'm getting freaked out. I'd been blown up, shot at, almost RPG'd, and now some locals playing mind games. I radio into our tactical operations centre that there's an unarmed local staring at me at the north post. And I either wanted someone to clear me, to wax him, or come figure out what I'm seeing. E5 on the radio tells me he's sending a private out to help me. Wow. The dude comes out, looks up the hill at this dude, and promptly notes out of there. Goes back to TOC and tells E5 that there's really a guy staring at us through the mountain range. So the E5 comes up the shack, and I point this dude out. And I'm not lying, as soon as the E5 gets eyes of the local, the dude jumps up, hops up on the boulder and starts screaming like somebody just dipped boiling water on him. Guard tower at the east corner can now see the guy, and as soon as the crazy local started howling, E-Shack loosens up about 30 burst rounds of 7.62 over his head. Now that's really loud when it's dead quiet, and the crazy guy jumps up off the rock, runs down the mountain screaming the whole way. It's now dead quiet for the rest of the night, with the commander up security 50%, meaning half the dudes on our outer outpost had to pull security the rest of the night. The running joke for the rest of the winter was to be on the lookout for the mind control experiment the CIA lost track of, freaking the life out of me. I work at a cafe in downtown. There's quite a few homeless shelters in range and a huge drug problem. So one day I'm working behind the bar and this redhead kid, probably in his early 20s, sits down in our seating area, starts talking under his breath. After a minute or two, he starts moving his hands around like he's casting a spell and gets up, starts yelling and disturbing everyone. I walk over to him, telling him he needs to leave for the day. The dude looks me straight in the eyes and says, "It's all a game. I'm gonna kill you all with one finger." Now I think whatever. I get a death threat and a lot of other crap, but managed to get him away. Now fast forward to where we're closing up around 9 PM. I lock the doors and start heading towards a parking garage that my car's in. It's probably about 6 blocks away. No big deal. Though winter up here is insanely dark, so it's really pretty creepy in downtown. And we're about a block or two of walking out when I hear a hissing noise. I freak out because I can't see anyone. I pick up the pace a bit, then I hear hurried footsteps in the snow behind me. Screw this. I booked it to the staircase from the garage because I wasn't going to wait for an elevator. I'm about to staircase up and heard the door I thought was just shut slam. I finally get to my car as quick as possible. I look around and lo and behold, there's a guy from earlier, but he's furious still. He sees me in the car and books it at full speed and starts hitting my window screaming, "I'm gonna kill you." I double check him, making sure that he can tell the door's locked, and I drive away. I call the cops the next morning and they found the dude. Apparently he thinks he's in the Illuminati and completely caboted my story to the police. He had some jail time and a restraining order, and I haven't seen him since. Working at a night shift in a care home, there's only 2 people working at night. We get everyone to bed and tidy up, then sit down and watch TV and answer if they need anything from the residents' bell. So it's about 2 in the morning. The bell rings. This is weird, as the home's in the countryside about 10 miles away from the nearest village. We go to investigate and find a man at the front door. He says if he can use the phone as his car's broken down. He isn't allowed in, but we offer to phone a tow truck for him. He agrees. We go and get the phone, and when we come back, he's gone. Weird, but we think maybe he's gone to his car or something, and we sit back down, but can see through the corridor that the man's now inside, standing in the TV room. He didn't see us, so we run and hide. We still have the phone to call the cops, but they take a while. About 15 minutes later they show up. We let them in, calm us down, and search everywhere, but the man's nowhere to be found. We call the management to send some more staff out to stay with us during the night. The manager arrives, the police leave, and we're back watching TV and chatting a bit calmer now. We then hear the front door open and close, go to investigate, call the cops again, look out the window and see the man sprinting away. He's been in the home the entire time the cops are there hiding. What's more, he didn't even have a car. I have no idea what he wanted, but I'm sure glad I don't work nights anymore. I hit church time towards the end of the project, and there's a lot of people in the building just chugging away at their deadlines commonly until 5 to 6 AM. So not night shift, but close enough. It hits 4:45 AM, and I decide to head off for some sleep to then come back in for 10 AM. say bye to some friends and promptly begin heading back home, which is barely 10 minutes away. As I walk across a car park, I spot a guy walking on the pavement, way on the opposite side, dressed in a full black tracksuit with his hood up and cap down. Naturally just a suspicious guy, and me being kinda small, I kept an eye on him. I hit just towards the other two buildings on my other side, and I can hear him shouting. I turn my head to look, and he's aiming it at me, very hostile. I'm unable to make out the words he's using. I quickly turn my head. I pick up the pace, walking between buildings, and decide to look back over my shoulder. There he was, arms up in the air, walking maniacally towards me in the centre of the road. Now I should add here, the car park we have is very big, and there would have been no way the guy could have crossed it in a minute or two that it took me to be where I was without running. This guy was definitely here to terrorise me at least. I've never been stalked before, and at this point my options are to run, walk to the dorm where the students should be, keep going home, or go back to my work building. Now I really don't want to get chased close to 5 AM to be trapped outside a building with a guy that looks really big. Especially as it's so dark where I am. I finally go with going back to my workplace to avoid being turned back on myself and finding him in a darker alley. So I just keep walking and pick up the pace. Not enough to be obvious, but to be able to keep distance. I walk past the dorms, turning onto the main road where the streetlights are, and I immediately took out my phone to ring my co-workers. I literally blew up his phone as I kept my other hand in my pocket but wrapped around my keys, so if it turned nasty I'd have a weapon. Thankfully after 6 minutes, my co-worker picked up, immediately running out to me standing on the phone. I ended up dashing into the first takeaway place that was open and just stood there waiting for my co-worker. The guy never followed me down the turn I took to get to this takeaway. He must have kept on walking, scurrying off. I walked home, and whilst I was a little nervous walking home late at night afterwards, I'm not afraid to do it again. I'm just more cautious now, and often tell someone when I'm about to head off that I'll message them when I go home. I'm glad I haven't seen him since. I worked nights audit at a semi-wanky hotel next to the airport. One night I got a call from a lady in 204. She says I was arguing, loud noises and crying coming out of 206. I checked the computer. No one's checked into that room due to maintenance issues. The hell? I call my supervisor to see what to do next, and she tells me to go and get security and follow them up with a key. No thanks. But I decide to be the bigger man and go up anyway. As we get off the elevator we hear crying. It's loud, I mean. My heart starts racing as we near the door, so I hand the key to the security guard. The next 5 minutes seem to happen in slow motion. He opens the door and immediately flicks the light on. Now keep in mind, in 206 we're on the 2nd floor. Only one door in by me, and it's like 3 AM with no one around. As we enter the room, the shower's on and steam's coming from under the door. There is only one lamp on in the room that's super cold, and there's a lady facing the wall away from us. As Frankie approaches, he says, "Is everything okay?" And she stopped crying and rolled over. She's covered in blood, just staring at us. That's when we realised the shower had stopped and the door was open, and there's a 6'5" man standing in the doorway. As we turned around, the cops tased him and arrested him. I still have no idea what happened, and it made me never go back to that hotel again. I hit church time towards the end of the project, and there's a lot of people in the building just chugging away at their deadlines commonly until 5 to 6 AM, so not night shift but close enough. It hits 4:45 AM and I decide to head off for some sleep to then come back in for 10 AM, say bye to some friends and promptly begin heading back home, which is barely 10 minutes away. As I walk across the car park, I spot a guy walking on the pavement, way on the opposite side, dressed in a full black tracksuit with his hood up and cap down. Naturally just a suspicious guy, and me being kinda small, I kept an eye on him. I hit just towards the other two buildings on my other side, and I can hear him shouting. I turn my head to look, and he's aiming it at me, very hostile. I'm unable to make out the words he's using. I quickly turn my head. I pick up the pace, walking between buildings, and decide to look back over my shoulder. There he was, arms up in the air, walking maniacally towards me in the centre of the road. Now I should add here, the car park we have is very big, and there would have been no way the guy could have crossed it in a minute or two that it took me to be where I was without running. This guy was definitely here to terrorise me at least. I've never been stalked before, and at this point my options are to run, walk to the dorm where the students should be, keep going home, or go back to my work building. Now I really don't want to get chased close to 5 AM to be trapped outside a building with a guy that looks really big, especially as it's so dark where I am. I finally go with going back to my workplace to avoid being turned back on myself and finding him in a darker alley, so I just keep walking and pick up the pace. Not enough to be obvious, but to be able to keep distance. I walk past the dorms, turning onto the main road where the streetlights are, and I immediately took out my phone to ring my co-workers. I literally blew up his phone as I kept my other hand in my pocket but wrapped around my keys, so if it turned nasty I'd have a weapon. Thankfully after 6 minutes, my co-worker picked up, immediately running out to me staying on the phone. I ended up dashing into the first takeaway place that was open and just stood there waiting for my co-worker. The guy never followed me down the turn I took to get to this takeaway. He must have kept on walking, scurrying off. I walked home, and whilst I was a little nervous walking home late at night afterwards, I'm not afraid to do it again. I'm just more cautious now, and often tell someone when I'm about to head off that I'll message them when I go home. I'm glad I haven't seen him since. I worked at a night zoo. The place was pretty darn creepy at night, but I have never seen anything. But my friend recounted me this story. One night he was at the front desk when a nice young lady comes up to him and gushes about how awesome the night zoo is. She goes on about the atmosphere and whatnot, saying, "I saw a red monkey that was in a tree with long hair swinging its legs. Wow, did not expect the zoo to have free-ranging wildlife." This sent off a few alarm bells. First, monkeys are nocturnal animals. That's why we have none in the night zoo. Second, all zoos are quarantined somehow to prevent external wildlife from entering due to diseases and whatnot. Third, a red monkey with long hair swings its legs. I mean, come on. There were no monkeys in the zoo that night, and none of them are nocturnal. Who wants to see a bunch of sleeping monkeys? Yes, a wild monkey may have climbed in, but the chances of that are so slim. I'm from an Asian country, So a humanoid figure could well be a ghost we call Potinik, which is a female ghost with long hair. The colour? Well, I don't know of any official colours of a ghost. It's late at night and someone says they saw something watching them from a tree. Now, either it was something paranormal or that lady was completely out of it. All I know is I'm glad it wasn't me she come up to in the dead of night like that. I think either possibility is just as scary as each other. I used to work at a relatively small security company. It was privately owned, having about 30 employees altogether. They'd get a contract with a factory, and then basically your job was to sit in the factory for 8 to 12 hours while no one was working in it. So I'd sit by myself, alone, overnight in a completely abandoned factory. In my 2 years of doing that job, I never had one single thing happen to me that I'd call paranormal or supernatural. However, I did have Dave. One night my captain calls me on my phone and tells me that a new trainee would be coming in around 5 AM and to show him the ropes, teach him how to make rounds, etc. So it's about 4:45 AM and I step outside the parking lot to have a smoke and wait on the new guy. After about 10 minutes, a car pulls up, stops, backs up and drives away. I was clearly visible, so I have no idea why he left. The car passed by about 3 or 4 more times before finally pulling in, then shutting off the engine. I can see him in the car, and he's just sitting in the driver's seat staring at me. In the back seat are 2 kids, probably 6 to 8 years old. After about 3 minutes of me wondering what's going on, he finally gets out. Now he's weird looking. Dave's 4'10" and larger than anyone I've ever seen. He has a huge rash covering 70% of his body with a white crust outlining it. He then speaks. Had a little trouble finding here. His voice is high pitched. I mean really high pitched. I'm talking Judge Doom in the final scene of Who Framed Roger Rabbit high pitch. Then he extends his hand to shake mine. Without much thinking, I shake it. There's 1 finger on it. 1. And the rest of his hands look kind of stumpy. One of the kids gets out of the car having the same rash, also fat and fingers missing, says, "Can I get a drink?" He turns around and screams to get back in the car. I'm in shock. So I take the guy around the factory, showing him the perimeter, telling him where the emergency stuff is. About a minute into our walk, I notice how the guy smells awful. I mean, literally reeks. The whole time he says strange questions like, "Do you have a crush on anyone that works in here? Can I hunt on the property, etc." He finally leaves after standing in the office trying to make small talk for a good 15 minutes. On his way out he said, "We're going to be good friends, even if you don't know it." I went home about 2 hours later and stood in the shower for a good solid hour, washing myself, trying to get the image of that guy out of my head. I called my captain and said to him to reassign me to a complete new area. I'd seen enough of him. It's been a good 10 years since that and it still bothers me. I hesitated when they offered me the job at McDonald's as a night shift manager. I'd already worked at the store for 6 months, but that was during the day. I rarely worked after dark, and I talked to co-workers who had super busy, understandingly awful rowdy customers. Those are the general complaints, and I figured that's why the night shift manager position had such a high turnover rate. In 6 months, there'd been 4 new managers, and every single one of them had quit. The last one out was Jesse, a guy who used to work the afternoons and would always come in higher. He did it so often that I'd assume that was just how he was. And one day he come in sober, and I thought, damn, I see why they hired him. It didn't surprise me too much to see when he accepted the promotion. The one benefit of the position was that there's no one on you. No mystery shoppers. The general manager's at home asleep, and you could pretend the ice cream machines are broken all you wanted, and no one's gonna call out for it. What did surprise me was when he quit. Barely a week in. He didn't even put in a notice. He walked out of the store in the middle of the shift and never came back. His final paycheck was gathering dust in the back of the office, and no one ever managed to get in touch with him. And that's when they offered me the position. I had my doubts, sure, but I just turned 19. I had no idea what I wanted to do in life, and the pay was nearly double my salary as a regular crew member. So I took the job, underwent about a week of training, and the next thing I knew, I was in charge of the place from 11 to 11, 5 nights a week. It wasn't bad. My hours got changed to 11 to 7 and I enjoyed it more. For the first 3 hours, I would have an extra worker in the kitchen and another one up front to take orders and hand food out in the window. They both left at 3, and then the store was empty except for me and Miram, the only cook in the kitchen. She's a short, quiet, middle-aged woman who had been working there for a decade. She didn't speak English too well, but I understood her fine. It was around 4 one Saturday night, and I understood why Jesse left. The line outside was gone and the parking lot was empty. The floor and tables in the lobby were spotless, untouched since the janitor had left. The only sound was the constant hum of the fryers. I knew I had to do things though. I still need to reboot the computer system, count the registers, but I took a moment to stand by the front counter, looking out into the lobby that closed each night at 11. I wasn't looking at anything in particular, but my eyes settled on the reflection in the window. I saw something move underneath one of the booth tables. My eyesight wasn't great, so I leaned over the counter that I could squint and just about see things. Now I knew I wasn't imagining things. I saw a girl's legs sticking out horizontally underneath a table. She had snow white shoes, the type nurses wear. Her legs were bare, but I couldn't see anything above her kneecaps. The back of her heels rested on the floor, and her toes pointed towards the ceiling. Then the toes of the shoes started to sway back and forth like listening to music. I watched her for a moment. Was she hurt? Is this a prank? People have walked into the lobby after closing before, looking to order or use the bathroom. Never like this. I've never seen them act like this ever. They'd usually come right up to the front counter. I'd say sorry, lobby's closed, and that's the end of it, but not this. Hey, I shouted. Lobby's closed. My voice echoed through the building, and as soon as I yelled it, the legs froze in place. For a moment, they both laid on the floor completely still. The girl under the table drew them in close, one at a time. They're far enough within the booth that I can no longer see them. I figured she's getting up and waited to show herself, but never did. I shout again, I know you're there, but nothing happened. I sighed and lowered my headset around my neck and walked into the lobby. She was gonna have to acknowledge me whether she wanted to or not. But when I turned the corner and made it to the booth, no one was underneath. I looked under the other tables and saw no one. I took a wide scanning of the whole lobby. Besides Ram in the kitchen, the place is empty. I sat there for a while, my feet frozen to the floor, and eventually I sighed and walked back towards the counter, trying not to dwell on the fact that I'd imagined a pair of legs under the table for at least a minute. I wasn't going crazy, I'm just tired. I sighed and put the headset back on, and when I was sure no one had pulled into the drive-thru, I double-checked the entrances to make sure all the doors are locked. They already are. If there was really a girl hiding somewhere in the store, she would have been hiding for at least the past 5 hours. That's insane. I would have noticed her before. I took another glancing look past the lobby as I walked back around the counter and paused. In the reflection of the glass, I see one of the white shoes laying on the floor. I can't see anyone else. No one's under the booth. I turned around to get Miram's attention, but she wasn't in the kitchen now. She must have gone to the stockroom for supplies. I turned back around trying to get the best angle for the reflection, but from behind the counter, I can only see shadows below the table, and of course, the shoe laying beside it. A moment later, a small pale hand reached out from the darkness, grabs the shoe and pulls it back under the table without a sound. I almost forgot to breathe. I stared at the reflection from an entirely different angle, waiting for someone to poke out again. Another sign that this is real. I don't know how long it took me to realize the phone was ringing. Ram called my name from the office. When I turned around, she was walking over to hand me the still ringing landline phone. I gave another look towards the reflection in the window before taking the phone, allowing myself to relax again. I see nothing. It's late. I'm exhausted, going crazy. I decide to thank Miram and answer the call. I didn't expect much. At this point in the night, no well-intended person would ever call us. It's usually a mistake or some kids pulling a prank, or someone who wasn't sure we're open 24/7 wanted to call before they drove here. But I knew from the moment that I had heard the caller's voice that something's different. Help me, please. A young soft voice trembled on the line. A little girl. My eyes drift across the lobby to the reflection in the window. Who is this? I'm stuck, she said. I didn't see anything unusual near the booth at this time, and she repeats, I'm stuck under the table. Where are you? I said very shakily. Help me get out. I'm stuck, I can't get out, she replies. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, and my vision goes hyper-focused. Where once a reflection is blurry, I can now see it with perfect clarity. Nothing happened though, nothing moved from under the table, but the voice on the phone keeps begging for help. Please sir, I've been stuck here for so long. I almost hung up right then and there. If I had though, I think I would have pretended nothing happened. And if the phone rang again, I wouldn't have answered it. But this wasn't the sort of thing anyone could ignore, and I had this feeling crawling through my skin that I could hang up the phone as much as I wanted. But she wasn't going to stop calling. I went back into the lobby. I didn't walk any slower than usual, but it seemed to take forever to make it to the booth. I kept thinking about Jesse, how he'd suddenly disappeared without explanation. I then crouched down and looked under the table, and no one's there. I gave a shaky sigh of relief. The voice on the phone felt so fake now, obviously a prank caller. One who happened to have picked up at the same time as me. Nice one, idiot, I said. I then cut the phone off. "But I can see you now," she said, sounding honestly confused. "I'm right next to you. You're wearing a red and black uniform and a visor." "Yeah, obviously," I said. And she said, "And your eyes are brown, and you don't have a name tag." Her descriptions kept going, to the point where she described the way I was crouching down, the shape of my nose, and the tremble on my hands. I looked to the window again, trying to see past my own reflection into the parking lot outside. "Someone's watching me from the outside," I told myself, but I was wrong. The reflection is all I need to see. In it was a girl's face peeking out an inch or two from the table. She stared at me, nearly an arm's length away, her lips moving in sync with the words I heard through the phone. I jerked away from her, stumbling back against a chair. I dropped the phone to the floor. I can still hear the pitch in her voice, but no sound whatsoever emerging from under the booth itself. There was nothing there, nothing but floor tiles and support beams for the table. I looked back into the glass and I could see her there, clear as day, looking up at me with black eyes. Her mouth suddenly moved soundlessly. I now grabbed the phone and ran back behind the counter, my heart pounding in my chest, my throat, my head. I'm struggling to breathe. I look back at the window and there she is again, watching me with her head poking out of the booth. She frowned, and you can see tears dripping down her face. "Why'd you leave me? I thought you were gonna help me. I'm stuck." She kept going, and I started listening more, feeling very sick. I was snapped out of it by Maram calling my name from the kitchen. I turned around to see her watching with narrow eyes. "You okay?" For a moment, I had no idea how to answer that. I looked back at the window, seeing nothing. There was no way in hell I'd imagined all of that. I placed the phone to my ear and heard the girl screaming again. It was almost comforting. She's real. I can hear her. I told Maram about the girl under the table and her voice on the phone. I must have been talking too fast because she couldn't understand me, so I hand her the phone and tell her to listen, but she hears nothing. I can hear the girl humming to herself now. That's all I remembered. Next thing I knew, I woke up in the back of an ambulance. Apparently, I had an episode of psychosis due to stress, and I can tell you it is the most terrifying thing that ever happened to me. Even though none of it was real, I still have nightmares about it to this day. When I was in the 8th grade, my parents separated. Basically, my mum packed her and I up one night and we moved to my granddad's house and didn't look back. We ended up living there through my high school years when he died. My parents officially got divorced. My mum remarried and we moved into the city with my stepfather. My grandpa lived on the first floor of the apartment, and the owners, an elderly couple who were family to us through marriage, lived on the second floor. The property also had a small in-law cottage out in the back where my uncle lived. For some reason that I will never understand, there was no lock to get into the actual building if you entered through the back. The back door opens into a landing where there was a locked and deadbolted door to our apartment, and then 2 sets of stairs. One led up to the also locked and deadbolted door of the second floor apartment, while the other led down the stairs to the basement where there was no lock. Our apartment could also be entered from the front of the building, but in order to access the second floor apartment to the basement, you have to go through this landing. The basement was actually pretty nice, and at one point They had started converting it into its own apartment before ultimately deciding to make this a law cottage instead. So in the basement, there was a full kitchen complete with its own oven, sink and refrigerator. The washer and dryer, which was shared by all of us, also in the basement, as well as some general storage items. The basement was entirely open except for a back room that was full of storage. It had one of those kind of swinging saloon style doors that you can see above and underneath them. The storage area was longer than it was deep, so you couldn't really see much behind the doors aisles from the shelves. You had to actually walk in to see them. So one night while I'm in high school, while I'm 16, after taking a shower, I saw that the laundry bin in the bathroom was pretty full, so I grabbed a ton of laundry and head down towards the basement. It's a pretty late night, but I figured I'd at least get it started and move things over in the morning. I toss everything onto the ground and start sorting out the colours when I get hit with this horrible feeling in my gut. The basement was not at all creepy. It's pretty well lit and pretty welcoming, with the kitchen and everything else, but for reasons I can't explain, something felt wrong. Anyone who's ever been hit with that feeling that they're being watched will know exactly what I'm talking about. I don't know how or why it come over me, but it was something that I could not shake, and I found myself looking over my shoulders constantly while I was there. I don't know why, maybe to assure myself I was being a big baby, but I began walking towards the back room, but stopped myself just as I reached out towards the swinging doors. I've been a horror fan for as long as I can remember, and had seen more horror movies than I could count, and I knew that if that was a horror movie, I'd be calling myself an idiot and saying do not go to the back room. I quickly snapped my hand back and ran up the stairs, leaving all the clothes behind, and into our apartment, where I locked the doors and immediately told my mum that I just had the worst feeling in the basement and I was super creeped out. Despite me not being the type of person that scares easily, she basically rolled her eyes at me and told me to go to bed. I ended up doing this, and it took a while to shake the feeling until I finally fall asleep. Later that night, my bladder woke me up, and I stumbled out of my room to the bathroom. I didn't turn any of the lights on as I started making my way towards the bathroom because it usually woke up my granddad and I didn't want to bother him. When I got closer to the bathroom, I noticed my mum standing in the doorway of her bedroom, and something looks off. It took me a moment to realise she was clutching the phone. She then noticed me and whispered to me to get against the wall, of which I did with no hesitation. It took a few moments for the grogginess to wear off and my eyes adjust to the dark, but I could see what she did. My mum's bedroom was immediately off the kitchen. The kitchen was where the back door that led to the basement was located. The door had a tiny window up, with a small but thick curtain. It was thin enough that you could see that someone was outside the door, but thick enough to not be able to make out any of the features of the person on the opposite side. But there was someone on the other side of the door. Every now and then the doorknob would move and you could hear the scratching sound that was on the other side. I have honestly never been so afraid in my life. I'm not sure how I managed to do what I did next. It was like someone else had taken control of me, and I slid down against the wall I was clinging to, and started to crawl against it in the darkness towards the kitchen. My mum looked petrified, watching back and forth between me and the door. She kept whispering to stop and go back, but I kept going forward. lone against the wall towards the counter where I slowly grab a butchering knife. I was shaking the whole time I moved with the knife in my hand on the ground next to the fridge, which is next to the door the man's trying to get into. I had this horrible feeling that I was going to be killed, but if I was, I'd at least go out with a fight. It felt like I sat there forever in the darkness next to the door with my mum hiding in the bedroom doorway across from me, just waiting. But it was only for a few minutes. My mum had already called 911 before I woken up and stumbled my way towards the bathroom. The lights from the approaching squad cars soon filled the kitchen, and from the other side of the door, I can hear a sudden clamoring and commotion and the slam of the back screen bursting open, as well as the assailant running off. It was around 3 AM when this happened, so it was completely dark outside, and we lived by some train tracks with very thick forestry around us, making it easy for the man to escape. The police pursued him though. The policeman come in and took my statements and my mum's. My grandpa's also. He managed to sleep through the entire thing until the police came through to search the apartment. Sounds like a me thing to do. The outside of the door and the doorknob were completely covered in deep scratches, like someone had been going at it with a knife trying to figure out how to get in. But that's not the most horrifying part. That is reserved for the basement. The clothes I'd brought down were not where I'd left them. They had been thrown about in the back room, the one with the swinging door that I had stopped myself from going in. The boxes were out of view, and they've all been opened and gone through, with missing food wrappers on the floor. He had been down there looking for something to steal. He was down there when I went down to do the laundry, and I almost walked in that room, and would not have seen him had he had a knife or other weapon. To this day, I can't help but find thinking to myself, what would have happened had I walked into that room alone? I woke up at about 3:30 AM, unable to go back to sleep. I think screw it. I have to start getting ready for school in 2.5 hours anyway, might as well get up. Soon I realise there is nothing to do that early in the morning, so I decide I'm gonna walk up to the 7-Eleven, grab a Pepsi and walk around for a bit. I leave for the 7-Eleven at about 4 and walk around for 20 minutes. I look at the time on my phone and think, alright, time to go back. I'm gonna take the long way. The long way which basically leads straight to where I live. I turn the corner to start my journey down the long street, and the first thing I see is someone sitting on a bench at one of those little party huts at parks. You know, I have a bathroom, grills and benches. If you've ever walked around at night, you know that feeling you get when you see someone. I'm hoping to just walk past them with no problems, but of course, that didn't happen. I walk a little bit closer towards the party hut, then I hear the person sitting there say hey. I turn to give her a head nod. From what I could see, she looks kind of weird. Then she says, why don't you come over here? Then things go bad. So of course, me being a straight female, my first thought is, oh, she wants me to hang out with her. Then the skeptical part of my brain is like, wait a minute, this isn't right, keep walking. I listen to the skeptical part of my brain and continue walking, and she keeps screaming for me, all of a sudden stopping. I see 2 people walk out from behind the hut and start walking towards me, and one of them screams, are you deaf? I guess my fight or flight response kicks in, Thoughts are racing through my head and I'm debating on whatever I should do now. Should I run? No, what if they're faster? I can't fight them. I've never fought before and there's two of them. It then randomly pops in my head that the next best thing to do is try and scare them. And I remembered something Bray Wyatt said the night before on WWE Monday Night Raw. I turned to look straight at them and screamed in a really deep voice, "Your shattered bones will pave the streets of my kingdom." I then hear, "What the heck?" Yeah, screw that. Them and the girl just take off running across the park. They probably thought I was a psychopath. I bolt it home, laughing on the way. I had too many emotions running back. Shock, relief, fear, and laughter because I managed to scare them off. One summer night, when I was around 5 years old, my sister and I, who was 5 and 8 at the time respectively, woke up. Through our window, we can hear my parents yelling loudly on the back patio. This was not a common occurrence, and when they did fight, it was not typically anywhere that was near to having a chance of us hearing. But this sort of thing did happen from time to time. And through the situation, we kind of shrugged it off, shut the window and went back to sleep. We completely forgot about the ordeal. It wasn't until years later we learned the truth about the yelling. As an adult, I overheard my mom explaining the situation to a family member in another room. I'm a little fuzzy on details as this occurred long ago, but this is the gist of it. Apparently at some point at night after my sister and I went to bed, my parents received an unusual phone call from someone using an electric interpreter, the same type of technology a person who is deaf might use to make calls and communicate over the phone. Understandably, my parents were a little surprised because they didn't know anyone who would use this service to contact us. But either way, they accepted the call. I'm not sure how this person on the other line introduced themselves, or if they even did at all, but they knew the full names of everyone in my family, which was immediately very creepy and alarming. The conversation began to escalate as the person on the other end of the phone very specifically explained what our home looks like, and told my parents they're hiding somewhere in our backyard, which was large, dark, and full of all kinds of plants and trees, making it hard to see them in there. There were too many places to look. At this point, the tormentor made it clear they had the intentions of entering our home, dismembering myself and my sister. At this point, understandably, they were beginning to become frantic. There's a chance no one's here and it's a cruel joke, but what if it wasn't? My dad asked if they're really out there and they said they were. They say, what are my parents doing at that moment? They then managed to describe exactly what they're wearing, and just like that, this infection of a human on the other end of the line explained what my dad was doing specifically. Exactly what he was wearing. Where certain things on our patio were placed and my mum's facial expressions. They were real and about it. My dad, a rough guy but with a heart of gold, charged into the night ready to kill anyone he encountered. But neither of my parents had cell phones. As my dad was venturing out into the dark that night, he found nothing, and when the cops showed up soon after, they found nothing too. The police were not able to trace the call because the electronic interpreter, which they said was a common device used by people trying to anonymously harass people over the phone. I was not told about this until a decade after it happened. When I was 6 years old, my favourite thing to do was explore the woods by my home. I never went into the thicket alone. My friend Ethan liked to join me, but sometimes it would be me and my neighbour Katrina, who was 7 at the time. To get to the woodsy area, you had to cross a large tree fallen over a small ravine, something I would never do now, but at my age I was fearless, I guess. So my friends and I spent many days daring each other to cross the bank, back and forth over the tree without using our arms for balance. Stupid, I know. One particular dreary summer day, I asked Ethan and Katrina to explore with me, but Ethan wasn't feeling too well, so stayed at home. Katrina and I set off down the obscure path that led to the fallen tree, and spent a couple of hours in the woods. I remembered the smell of woods, the damp, slippery feel of the leaves beneath my feet. It had been raining the night before, and the woods were electric with the sounds of birds chirping and water rushing through the ravine. We're so entranced. That's why we didn't hear the man approaching us. My first thought was to get the hell out of there. I knew all about stranger danger and had this weird feeling, but I could tell Katrina was not thinking exactly the same. The man had told us we looked like great explorers and he could use our help. He said his puppy ran off into the woods and she wouldn't be able to take care of herself, so it's important to find her soon. I hesitated, but Katrina always had a weakness for puppies and loved to help. We set out looking for the missing puppy, but I kept getting this weird feeling. Every time we walked towards the direction the man come from, he would tell us he already looked over there, and that we should keep on the other side. By that time, I was done. I was ready to get out of there, but Katrina wouldn't budge. I told her I'm leaving and she said she's gonna stay. I wanted to beg her to come, but I decided to leave her because I couldn't stand being there any longer. I jogged out of the woods, careful not to slip on any damp leaves, but the fallen tree was covered in them, so I tiptoed. Halfway across, my body went through a trail of goosebumps, and I ran. I forgot how slippery the log was and didn't even realise I was falling into the ravine until I got into the bottom. I heard a loud crack and looked down and see my femur was broken and sticking through my skin. Things got foggy after, but I guess I screamed enough at the closest neighbour to call 911. I'm just happy I screamed loud enough to save Katrina. The police and EMTs found me lying, crying, gasping my broken leg. The last thing I remembered was pointing towards the woods, telling them to look for Katrina. I wake up the next day with my leg hooked up to the ceiling and a traction in a world of pain. My mum was holding my hand and said that when I was ready the police would like to talk to me. I asked if I was in trouble, which she said not at all, they just needed answers. A policeman come in and asked me if I'd seen the man in the woods before I'd broken my leg. I recounted the events that happened and they asked if I saw Katrina. They had. When I left, the man started asking Katrina about her family and if they had any big scary brothers that had come out looking for her if I was out late. Their conversation was cut short by the screams and Katrina ran immediately towards the sound. Luckily the man's reflexes weren't quick, and even though he tried, he's never able to keep up with her. She said she managed to look around at the end of the woods and saw him running back to them. She thought that maybe he was going to get help. Turns out there was no lost puppy. The police never found a creepy man, but they did find a bag hidden in the bushes. Inside the bag was some duct tape, rope and binoculars. Sometimes I have nightmares about what could have happened that day, and even now I get chills going into the woods. So a long time ago, I had a falling out with a friend who liked to cyber harass people she didn't like. Because I knew this, I took precautions on all my social medias and added two-step verifications where it would send you codes to your cell phone if someone tried to log in or change your details. Seemed like a safe step, right? I never thought about it any further until a few days ago. I received an SMS text from a random number that had addressed me by my full name first, which freaks me out a little, because the spelling of my first name is uncommon where I'm from. No big deal. Maybe it's just an old friend who changed phones. I gave him the classic "who dis" back at them, to which I received an even stranger reply that I was not expecting. "Oh my god, it's you. Are you 18? I have something I want to cash app you." Well, that's weird, I think. Probably just some scam to hack me. I said, "Who the hell is this?" and got another text back from that number. No less than 5 minutes later, I get 3 calls and 2 spam voicemails from a different unrecognized phone number. Then I pick up the phone, followed by my full name. That's alarming. I immediately took screenshots and had my boyfriend call the phone, but to no luck. I blocked the number and hope that's it. Maybe 30 minutes later, I get 5 new calls from a number and a new, even more alarming set of text saying, "I'm a 40-year-old man and I'm in love with you. I keep trying to reach you until you respond. I won't stop." I immediately block the number and call my parents. Then within 2 minutes, he texts me from a new number again saying, "Wow, I just wanted to talk to you for 5 minutes. I'll even pay you for the task. But after that, consider me gone." Wow, again blocked. I alert my boss and the text stop. After work, I filed a police report and bought a baseball bat and set up some security alarms in my apartment. My first instinct was that it's a guy I recently worked with who'd been recently fired for harassment. One of my friends, who is a good person with tech stuff, changed his phone number and texted the number pretending to be me on a burner to get some info. It's a bit of a long conversation, so I'll sum it up by saying this guy basically wanted to talk to me on the phone to do weird things behind his screen. He called me 26 times getting no answer, so he stopped trying and we assumed that was the end of it. However, the next morning, I get a text from a new number again. He was claiming to be one of my friend's fathers. I started freaking out. Both my parents and boyfriend are at work, so he sent his mum over to calm me down to stay with me while I'm alone in the apartment. He called my phone and she answered, and all he said in this super creepy raspy voice is "please," then abruptly hung up. I was having a full-blown panic attack at this point, so she calls the police department and had an officer come out to update my report. She was still texting the guy while the cop was there, and once she told him law enforcement had been contacted, his whole story changed. He said he doesn't know anything about me, he doesn't even live near me and means no harm. He's just a lonely guy who got a phone number from Facebook deciding to harass me. I might remember this wrong, but I could have sworn I had my phone number set to private, and I know I had two-step verification. It may be from me posting on the Facebook marketplace, but I'm not even sure if it would work that way. I wanted to share this as more or less a warning to anyone who has two-step verification. Please make sure your account is as private as it can possibly be. I hope this doesn't happen to anyone else. This happened a few months ago, and I didn't realize how weird it was until I told my boyfriend a few months later. At my college, our students' IDs are pretty much essential to have. They get you into all of the academic buildings and get you all your food on the meal plan. I lost mine, being forced to find a new one. I went to the security desk and told the security guard I lost my ID and needed a new one. He said no problem, just come with me while I print you a new one. He was older, I have to say about 65, but in very good shape, definitely over 6 foot, and you could tell he was very attractive when he was younger. He had curly grey hair, very well kept and nice blue eyes. We went to the back security room in the main student commons building. It was a room that was a little ways back, but still had a good amount of foot traffic going by it. I walked in and sat on the couch that was across from the desk. He walked in and closes the door. He went on the computer, asking me for all information, my ID name, my name, birthday, class and year. When he pulled up my account, he saw my picture that is used for my ID. He said if I wanted to take a new one, and I said, no, I'm good, because I don't like my picture being taken. I looked a mess, because I wasn't expecting to need a new picture to be taken. He said, well, your picture's very good. You look pretty, most are bad. I laughed and said thank you, and told him I was a senior in high school and got that taken at orientation almost 3 years ago. He said you must have always been pretty then. I started to feel weird then. Faced a security officer at my college that's known for having great security. He then said the computer wasn't letting him print one without taking a picture since it was so old. He said to me, if you need to get a new ID, it makes you get a new picture after 2 years because people can change in looks, and we need to make sure that we have good confirmation. Okay. You just asked me if I wanted a new one, but now you're telling me I need a new one. I found that weird because I thought it was not the case. It didn't make sense with what he was saying. He then went into a closet with this security room and got out a camera on a tripod and told me to stand against the wall. I did and smiled awkwardly. He told me I needed to take my hair out of the bun because the hair needed to be down for the ID picture. Alright. But I didn't think much of this either, as I've never had a girl's ID without their hair down. He took the picture and said my eyes were closed. I laughed because my eyes are closed in 9 out of 10 pictures. Another reason I don't like my picture taken. He said it's fine, I don't mind taking a couple. He then came over and told me my hair looked awkward, so he was going to fix it up for me to look better. He fixes my hair and pulled my head back and said, it's good. I really don't care, no one looks at it. He rolled his eyes and said, whatever, it's your picture, but you better look good for it. And I said, it's fine, don't worry, just trying to be polite. And then for the next picture, I saw a clock on the wall and realised I'd only had 10 minutes before the class. I said, you can just use whatever one. I shouldn't have my eyes closed in all of them and I've got class in 10 minutes, I've really got to go. He then said, your professor isn't going to be mad if you're getting an ID from security, and it took a while. At this point I realised I'd been there for over 20 minutes. And I wasn't nervous but more sick of being there and wanted out. He then told me they take a few minutes to print and just to sit on the couch. He then starts asking me what my major is and if I have a boyfriend, which I said yeah. He said, how long have we been dating? And said, oh yeah, you know guys in college are no good, they're wasting your time. You should break off and find someone older and more mature. I didn't respond to that and just said, okay, well, I'm going to be going because I don't want to be late for class. He then said, what rush are you in? It's more important you do this. He then went from the desk to the back of the room to grab my ID. He said, wow, the picture's even better. I'm a pretty good photographer if I say so myself, and winked. He kept holding the ID, not handing it to me. I was getting annoyed at this point, but I'm really scared inside, not showing it. I said I'm sorry, but I have to go. He laughed and said, okay. I would think a senior wouldn't be nervous about being late, and handed me it. I basically snatched it out of his hands, and he said, well, I'll walk you out because you're not supposed to be back here without a security guard. I don't want you in trouble. I'm thinking, oh wow, just let me go. So he walked me out, and I said thanks and basically ran out the building. I'm not gonna lie, I thought he was weird and flirty, but I had never needed to get an ID made before, so I thought maybe it was actually the process and he was just a little too flirty while doing it. With 3 weeks left of school, however, I somehow managed to lose my ID. I'd been borrowing my boyfriend's because I was super busy at the end of the year and just thought, I really don't have half an hour to spare, I need to get a new ID. Finally, my boyfriend got annoyed with me using his meal plan and always having his ID and said, you need to go get a new one, it's 5 minutes tops. I said nah, it took half hour and I don't have time for that. He then says, what the hell were you doing? And I said, what happened? He said, no, that is not at all okay, you need to report it. I said I didn't care enough, but I asked him to come with me to get a new one. When I get the new one, it's a completely different security guard, and he said, yeah, no problem, just wait there, I'll be a minute. Not even 5 minutes later, he was back with a new one made. I told him what happened last time and he looked very concerned. He said who the security guard was. I didn't know his name but described him. He gave me the name and office of the hand security guard and told him he would call and tell them that I was coming over. I went and talked to the head security guard and told them what happened, and it's not their protocol, and he looked in the system and found over 30 pictures of me. He reported it to the higher ups. I had to go in and speak to a group of 3 in admin and let them know what happened, and found out Harry was fired for acting weird with other girls. It might not be the most crazy story here, but I hate the thought of being with him there alone, and that I was almost oblivious to how bad the situation actually was. I'm originally from Portland, OR, and got a great opportunity to take a scholarship at a school in Washington DC. My family doesn't have money, and to ship my car and fly out all of my stuff would cost several thousands of dollars. Plus, I was so afraid that the airline would break my cello, and so on, that I wasn't willing to take the risk. I decided to pack my 1991 Toyota full of my stuff and hit the road. I mapped it out that it would take 4 days if I hustled, costing around $500 worth of gas. Eating off the dollar menu and sleeping in my car, good stuff. Fast forward 1 whole day, and I'm like, screw this. I was at a pace of 16 hours a day driving, just starting my 2nd day. There was nowhere good to sleep in my car out in the middle of nowhere that runs around the I-90. The only marginally okay place I found was a parking lot of a small hospital somewhere in Missoula, MT I think. It felt so sketchy sleeping in my car. I can't put my finger on exactly what made me feel that kind of way, but the further I got from Oregon, the more I felt like I drew attention and people. I was running off adrenaline, covering 800 miles a day, calling my parents at every rest stop, and leaving voicemails on the machine letting them know where I was. I was physically and emotionally exhausted, and I was so ready to just be at my dorm to sleep. My car wasn't super old, but it was a flood salvage and not that reliable. I had to random engine lights on permanently, and I was so afraid I was going to break down and be stranded out in the middle of nowhere. If you've never made this trip, at least at this point in time, you need to pack cans of gas in your trunk, because if you run out of gas, you'll be miles away from the nearest petrol station. I remember driving all day through nothingness with nothing but tumbleweeds, sleeping on the side of the road, waking up and not seeing civilization again for a total of 12 hours of driving. Now fast forward to Wyoming. I don't remember where, but I was near South Dakota / Nebraska. I was running low on cash due to a rock hitting my side mirror, breaking the glass, and I needed to buckle down to have enough for gas. I saw a sign at some tiny church saying free community spaghetti dinner. Sounds alright. This did as that evening, and I was like, yeah, let's do it. It was only a few hours from before it started too. But I figured I could stop by and introduce myself, help set up and enjoy that sweet spaghetti. Long story short, it was great. I met some really nice folks and ate some really good spaghetti. Everyone seemed amazing. The pastor ended up asking me if I needed to sleep there for the night. A lady chimes in that they would be absolutely fine to find me somewhere. A third person claimed that they had some cots down in the preschool in the basement I could use. Heck yeah. So the time rolls around, we finish clearing up. Everyone leaves the church. I get shown to my cot, and inherent creepiness of sleeping in a cot in a dark preschool aisle. No red flags at all now. That cot was absolutely magic compared to the van. I put a few of them together and made a nest out of pillows and was able to lay out comfortably. But I did wake up hearing footsteps, however. It seemed like they were just kind of wandering around. I sat frozen, holding my breath. Oh wait. Then it hit me. I forgot to call my dad to tell him where I was. Sleeping in the basement of a church in a cot. I don't even know the name of or know exactly where I am. Even any nearby towns. I decided to try and get out of there. I quietly put my shoes on and tried to tiptoe opposite where I thought I could hear someone. I felt such anxiety in the dark. I can hear them behind me still. I knew there's probably an emergency exit at the end of the hallway, so I decided to start running. As I do, someone screams out, "Hey!" and they grab the back of my shirt. I felt their cold hand exposed to my skin. They ripped the spaghetti strap in some weird move. I'm still moving and not sure how I managed it, but I slid out of the bottom and quickly kept on running. It was too dark to see them or know who they were. I didn't turn around or look back. I kept on running up the hill in the darkness. I lost one of my shoes as I cut my foot on something in the grass but didn't care. I kept running with only one shoe until I got to my car, then burnt rubber out of there. I drove until the gas light came on and didn't even go to refill the tank until that was on. I still have no idea who that person was to this day. So this happened in 2013 when I was 17. My family was looking at this house, and the owner showed up and talked with my parents. Seemed like a nicer old man. Built the house himself. It's a pretty nice 2-story house overlooking a river. Anyway, I was standing back watching everyone talk as the owner is talking and laughing. When there's a break in the conversation, he turns away from my parents, and his expression completely and instantly changes from happy to the most sinister look that I've probably ever seen. I don't think he notices me watching. It probably appeared as though I was on my phone with my head down, but as soon as he turned his back, he instantly went back to smiling. It was so creepy that it made me feel physically sick. I told my mum and said how weird it was, but she said he's probably just awkward. So we got the house and moved in, and the next weekend my family's going to church, but I don't feel like going, so they all leave me at home. So it's Sunday morning at about 11 AM when I hear really loud banging outside. It's rhythmic and coming from the side of the home. I was on the other side of the house on the second floor. Honestly, I thought maybe it is the wind, but it stopped after about 5 minutes. 10 minutes later, I hear walking around downstairs. Chairs moving, kitchen cabinets opening, and the fridge opening. I immediately and quietly go to my door, lock it, grab a baseball bat. I call 911, which is a really good idea. I tell them my address and text my mum and tell her that someone's in the house and that I've called the police. At this point, the 911 operator said someone will be out there in 10 minutes. I tell her shush because I hear footsteps walking towards the stairs. Basically, the house is so thin, I could track where he was in the home. At this time, my mum says she's on her way. She's 30 minutes away. So here is a 17-year-old, 5'1", 100-pound girl hunkered in her room, full well knowing that if he come in, he'd overpower me and take the bat. I'm terrified now. I heard him walk down the doorway towards my door. I saw the handle turn but stop. It's locked. And I heard him stand there. He didn't move. I can hear his breath. It felt like forever, but really I think it is about 10 seconds. I heard him turn and go back down. I heard the back door open and shut. About 3 minutes later, the cops arrived. The 911 operator asked me if I could let them in or if they need to do it by force. I knew I had no one in with me, so I let them in. No one was there now. No sign of forced entry, nothing. When my mum got there, she looked to my stepdad and asked if he'd changed the locks, which he hadn't. I think the creepiest part, however, and what really validated my story, was that there are shoe prints that are larger than anyone's in our home, and the police hadn't been there yet. They just stopped outside my room. I've only told this to a few people outside of my family and recently began sharing it. I wish I'd told someone sooner, as I discovered a co-worker encountered these men also. I work downtown, 8 to 5 hours. Once in a while I do overtime, but not often. And not to this day had this happened before. It was just a couple of minutes after 5 PM when I left work, just a few blocks from my office, building to the train station. There are a few bars and back alleys along the walk, but the worst I've dealt with among there are homeless folks who get a bit aggressive wanting cash. They never bother me. The train ride from the station downtown is where I park my car about 40 minutes away if I'm lucky. I managed to get a seat and don't have to stand for the whole ride, luckily. On that day, I was lucky more or less getting a window seat, which left the seat next to me open. At the next stop, 3 men get on. One sat next to me, the other sat across from me facing me. I'm listening to music on my iPod so I can't really hear them. I did notice though, however, that the guy sitting next to me was trying to get closer to me on the seat. He would occasionally do this thing where he'd get close enough that his leg was touching mine. I'd scoot away, but he'd come closer. Eventually, I passed right against the window, and I had no doubt that he'd move even closer to me again. I was wearing sunglasses and could every so often glance at them. I'd noticed that they would occasionally say something and then all look at me, which is incredibly creepy and uncomfortable. I was getting close to my stop, but nervous about getting off. But mine is second to last on the train line, so when the train pulled into my station, I got off. The guy next to me tries to grab my arm, but I'm moving quick so I can get out. I was hoping they would get off the train at a different stop. It was a busy station, and they couldn't have known where I parked to, but they did. I guess it was their luck they targeted me. I park in the furthest lot from the station because the parking is free. It's about a 7-minute walk, which isn't usually too bad, but my lot tends to be pretty quiet and I was really worried about them following me. As a bit of background, I was overweight, worked in an office, so sitting down all day and not being able to work out. I was about 30 pounds overweight and couldn't run more than 30 seconds. Sad considering I ran track and played hockey before. I still play hockey, but on a women's daytime league it's not competitive. I'm the youngest on my team by 20 years, but my mum's on the team and it's still fun together. So anyway, I was crossing the bridge over the road from the station to the parking lot when I noticed 3 guys less than 10 feet behind me. I wasn't carrying a knife, though I do own a legal size knife. I didn't have pepper spray either because it's illegal in my Canadian city. I know a little bit about personal protection though, so I put my car key and house key in my fingers so if I hit someone it's gonna hurt more. The guys followed me then across the main lot. They didn't hide the fact that they're there, and the more nervous I was getting, the more I heard laughter. I managed to get across the road between the lots before they do. They had to wait a couple of cars before they can cross. I was almost halfway across the lot when they crossed the road. I start running. I could hear their feet pounding on the pavement behind me. I use my clicker to open my car when I get close. I then watch the door open, so glad that there was no one parked next to me. I'd barely closed my door and slammed the lock when the guys reached my car, banging on my windows and yelling, jeering. I've never been so afraid in my life. I'm very worried that they're gonna break the window to get in. Now there's a spot where I can see the guy banging on the back window of my hatchback, so I couldn't reverse out on my spot without running him over, which I should have, but I was afraid and not thinking. I was screaming, but there was no one around me. I don't know what they wanted, but I knew for one thing it wasn't good. I wish I'd screamed, or done something. I wish I had a screamer, but I realised I had something better. When you're being assaulted, you're not supposed to scream for help because no one wants to help. You're meant to scream fire because everyone wants to watch a blaze. So I turned on my alarm in my car. It was so incredibly loud that I thought I was gonna go deaf, but it had the reaction I wanted. The guys started backing off. I saw people walk into the lot in the direction of my car and saw what was going on. The guys back off towards the train station and start running, and I drive home as quick as I can. The next night I started working out, and I've worked out ever since then. If those cars hadn't been in the road at the same time as me, or if I'd run a bit slower, God knows what would have happened. For 6 months last year, I lived in the north of Spain. About a week before I was gonna move back to Ireland, my friend and I were at my house having dinner, drinking a latte. I was renting an apartment in the city, and my roommate was an older lady, maybe in her 50s. I'm 21. That night, my roommate left to go and have dinner with her friends. About a minute after she left, someone buzzed for the door to be open. I look at the camera and didn't recognize the woman. She looks to be in her late 20s and early 30s, so I just assumed it's one of her roommate's friends. And she's coming to meet her or something like that. Now, I'm not thinking much of it and buzz her into the building where they can meet in the lobby. At first I didn't buzz her in because I didn't recognize her. She walked away from the door, but then I hit the buzzer as soon as she walked in. I myself walked away from the camera, meaning I couldn't see if she actually entered or not, assuming that if she did enter, she would just call or text my roommate. Boy, was I wrong. This woman came up to my apartment building on the 6th floor. She come up 2 minutes after my roommate left, so I didn't know where she was at this point. Now, the two must have seen each other when my roommate got off the lift and the lady got in. Realizing that this is weird, I do not open the door when she rings it. I look through the peephole just to confirm that it wasn't anyone I knew. At this point, I back away from the door and gesture to my friend to be silent. We creep back to my room, which is on the far side of the apartment, and I begin calling my roommate, who isn't picking up. Meanwhile, the lady is constantly ringing at my doorbell. My roommate is not picking up. My friend is just telling me open my door. In her mind, it's a woman, so she must be harmless, but I tell her she's an idiot for underestimating the female sex. Women can be criminal too. She keeps telling me to open the door, but I refuse. The door keeps ringing and I look through the peephole. At this point, I understand that if she knew my roommate or was looking for someone specific, she would just call or text them. She didn't take out the phone at all. She just stayed eerily silent, didn't call out any names or ask if anyone was home. That's weird to me. I finally get through to my roommate. She says she wasn't expecting anyone and that she doesn't know anyone in that age range. She asks if I'm okay and I say I'm fine. Now it's been at least 20 minutes. I know the lady knows someone is home because the lights are on, and to my understanding that's why she's not leaving. I continue watching her through the peephole. I see her go into the lift for a minute and then come out again. The lift's really loud and it's not moved. She just went in and come back. In my mind it shows someone's waiting in the lift for her. After about 40 minutes she leaves. I ran back into our hall and flicked on the outside camera. The lady left the building with 2 men. They all had backpacks on and black gear. I will be internally grateful for trusting my instincts this day and not my friends. It's better to be safe than sorry.